It's funny. You type gangster into one of those AI image generators these days, and what do you get? Like pinstripes, fedoras, maybe even Al Capone himself, right?
Yeah.
But then try typing in thug.
Hmm.
Totally different story, isn't it?
Yeah,
And that, my friend, is exactly what we're diving deep into today.
it's true, yeah.
We've got a stack of research lined up for this one, articles, studies, the whole shebang. And we're going to really get into how, get this, racial bias is actually baked into the words we use every day.
Hmm.
And how AI is both exposing those biases and making them even worse.
It's like AI is holding up this really uncomfortable mirror, right, to our whole society. And it's forcing us to really confront these uncomfortable truths
Yeah.
about the language we use, about the biases we don't even realize we're carrying around.
Yeah, it's kind of like, have you seen those AI-generated images going around from Canva, I think it was?
Yeah, yeah.
One prompt, 2 words, thug and gangster.
Right.
And the results are, well, they're more than a little messed up.
They are, yeah. It's a simple experiment, but it's really powerful.
Yeah.
Because you see those images and just one look, right? It's all it takes. You see that stark contrast. For thug, the AI generates a person of color, but for gangster, it's a white guy, usually in a suit. And it just shows you right there in plain sight that even these algorithms, which are supposed to be neutral, they're not. They're learning all these biases from us, from our culture, from all the data we feed them.
It's kind of terrifying when you think about it. It's like it's everywhere, this bias.
Yeah.
But this goes way deeper than just Canva or any one AI, right?
Absolutely.
To really understand what's going on here, we got to unpack the words themselves. Let's start with thug. Can you give us some of the historical context for this word? Where does it come from?
Yeah, so thug actually, it originates from the Hindi word thag, and it basically means like a swindler, a cheat, a deceiver, that kind of thing.
Mm.
And during the British colonial period in India, they used that word thug to label certain indigenous criminal groups, particularly this one group, the Thuggee cult.
Right.
But, and this is important, the British, they often really exaggerated and sensationalized the activities of these groups, to justify their own colonial rule, their own oppression. They created this whole image of the thug as this inherently violent and deceitful figure, and that really played into these broader colonial stereotypes about the native population.
So they basically took a word, twisted it, and used it as a tool of oppression.
Basically, yeah.
That's awful. But how did we go from that to thug being this racially charged word that it is today?
Yeah, and that's where things get really unsettling over time, especially in the U.S. Thug became racialized,
Right.
and it's often used now as almost like a dog whistle.
Right.
It's a coded way to label Black and brown people as inherently criminal, as violent. Right.
And it just perpetuates these really harmful stereotypes, reinforces systemic racism. And the thing is, it's completely detached from the original context.
Right.
It's like the word itself is carrying all this baggage, centuries of prejudice.
And we're not even aware of it half the time.
Exactly. Most people, they don't even realize the weight of that word when they use it.
Right.
And this really highlights something that Christian Ortiz, he's the author of one of the articles we're looking at, he calls it justice AI.
Yeah.
And he argues that we can't just build AI, we have to build it responsibly. And part of that means really dismantling these biases, getting down to the core of them.
Okay, so we've talked about thug, but what about gangster? Because they're both linked to crime, right?
They are.
So what makes one so much more loaded than the other? Right, so you're right. Both terms are used to describe, people involved in criminal activity. But, and this is crucial, gangster usually makes people think of like organized crime.
Okay.
Especially those the classic images, white guys in suits.
Right.
Think about it. The Godfather, Scarface, Goodfellas. Hollywood has had a field day with gangsters, and it's actually shaped a more complex, even a romanticized view of them in a way.
So we've got this weird double standard. One word gets demonized, the other gets a movie deal.
It's true.
What does that say about how we see different groups?
It says a lot about the power of narratives because, gangster still has negative stuff attached to it, but it's not usually about race in the same way as thug. Gangster might even have some positive stuff mixed in, like, I don't know, like loyalty or ambition, even this kind of rebellious, like anti-establishment thing.
Right, right.
Thug, on the other hand, it's almost always just straight up derogatory, dehumanizing, no nuance to it at all.
Wow.
And this difference, even though it's just in how we talk about these things, it has real consequences out in the world.
It's like we've internalized these biases so much that they're not just in our language, they're in our stories, our entertainment.
Right.
And now, like we're seeing, they're in our algorithms.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important that we understand this, that we talk about it, because we need to recognize these biases and actually work to dismantle them.
Right.
Yeah, but also within ourselves.
It's almost like, is there even any hope here? Can we actually fix this in the AI space, or are we just going to be stuck with these, like, harmful patterns forever?
It's a big question, right?
Yeah.
And the good news is, I think there is hope.
Okay.
There are people out there working on solutions like this Christian Ortiz guy we've been talking about, his whole justice AI concept. It's really interesting stuff.
Okay, so color me intrigued. How does justice AI actually work?
Well, it's based on a few key principles. The first one, and probably the most important, is inclusive data.
Well,
It's not enough to just have a ton of data, like a massive data set. It has to actually represent everybody.
right.
Think about it this way. If you only train an AI on information that already has all these biases built in, guess what?
It's going to be biased.
Exactly. You're going to get those same biases right back out. So how do we get more voices in there, more perspectives, especially from people who have been historically marginalized and ignored, right?
Right. It's like teaching a kid something.
Yeah.
If you only give them biased information, how can you expect them to grow up with a fair and balanced view of the world?
That's a great analogy. It's the same idea here. And that actually leads into the second principle, which is bias detection.
Okay.
So imagine this. AI watchdogs, right? Systems that are designed specifically to sniff out and flag any unfairness or bias in algorithms. We're talking about building AI that can double-check itself, constantly testing and refining to try to catch these biases before they even make it into the final product.
Okay, so we've got more inclusive data going in, and then we've got AI checking itself for bias. What else is there?
This one's huge. Education. The more people understand how these biases work, the better equipped we'll be to spot them, to call them out, to demand better. We need policymakers, developers, educators, really everyone to be aware of this stuff and to be actively working towards solutions.
You know what they say, sunlight is the best disinfectant?
Exactly.
The more we know, the more transparent all this is, the better chance we have of actually using this technology responsibly.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of a perfect segue, because at the end of the day, this isn't just an AI problem, is it?
Not at all. This is a human problem.
Yeah.
AI is just a mirror. It's reflecting back the biases that we already have as a society in our language, our culture, our stories.
So where do we even start? Like, if we want to be part of the solution, not the problem, what can we do?
It all starts with awareness. Just start paying attention. Pay attention to the language you use every day, the media you consume, even the jokes you find funny. And ask yourself whose stories are being told, and more importantly, whose voices are being silenced.
So much of this is about just being aware, right? But how do we take that awareness and actually, like, do something with it? What can our listeners do? People at home who are hopefully just as fired up about all this as we are, what can they do to actually make a difference?
Well, it comes down to being mindful, being a critical thinker. Like next time you hear that word thug, or honestly, any word that's used to label a whole group of people,
Right.
take a second, think about it. Where'd that word come from? Who benefits from it being used that way? Is it propping up some harmful stereotype?
It's like that saying, the limits of my language are the limits of my world.
Exactly.
If we're stuck using language that's built on prejudice, it's going to be that much harder to break free from it.
Oh, no, 100%. And don't be afraid to challenge those biases when you see them.
Yeah.
Whether it's, just in conversation with somebody, or you read it in an article, or even if it's like, we were talking about AI-generated images.
Right.
Call it out.
Yeah. Speak truth to algorithms. I love that. Okay, so to bring this all back around, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to walk away with today? What's the big takeaway?
I think the biggest thing is just remembering that this isn't an AI problem, it's a human problem.
Right.
AI is just holding up a mirror, showing us our own biases, but we have the power to change those biases. We can understand how language works. We can question the stories we've been told. And when we do that, we can all fight back against bias, whether it's, hidden inside an algorithm or just woven into our everyday lives.
That's what makes these deep dives so important.
I agree.
We start with something as simple as a word, and then boom, we're all the way down this rabbit hole of history and culture and technology. And what we find is it's all connected.
It really is. And it all comes back to this. Words have power.
They do.
They shape how we think, what we believe, even how we see the world.
It's crazy. We didn't even have time to get into how AI could actually be used to, rewrite how we think about criminal justice. Imagine a world where instead of being based on, biased human judgment, sentencing was decided by an AI that was programmed for fairness.
Wow, yeah.
That's something to think about, right?
Definitely.
That's going to do it for us this week. Until next time, keep those questions coming, keep learning, and keep diving deep.